The future of progressive radio. This is the Dean Obadala Show on SiriusXM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live Tuesday, January 28th. And in studio, very excited to have. You've seen him on Joy Reid Show, I think just last week. You've seen him all over cable news. Jaime Harrison, former chairman of the South Carolina Democratic Party, now taking on Lindsey Graham, and it's our job to help him. JamieHarrison.com. I'll start by plugging the website. Jamie, it's great to see you in person, my friend.
It's great seeing you too, Dean. Thank you so much for having me.
No, we've chatted a couple times by phone.
Yeah.
Now you're in New York doing some stuff. So
Yeah.
I thought this was great. We have an opportunity for you to talk to listeners. I mean, just tell your story in a way, then we'll talk about the election. But, you know, I just love, in our chat before we came on air, how you're trying to address things in South Carolina. It's not Democrat. It's not Republican. It's about what's helping people.
That's exactly right. You know, the frame by which we have a discussion in South Carolina is because ultimately people just want stuff to get done.
Yeah.
That's what folks want. They don't really care who gets the credit all. They just want the stuff done. So what I always say is it's not about Democrats versus Republicans or progressives versus conservatives. What it's about is what's right versus what is wrong.
Right.
So it is wrong to have rural hospitals to close, right? How do you address that? Because if you live in that community, it doesn't matter who you voted for. You now don't have a hospital. So that's a problem.
Sure.
How is your leadership going to fix it? Or is your leadership willing to fix it? And that's where we are. You know, 30%, about a third of South Carolina is not connected to Wi-Fi or any fiber optics, right? So how in the world are we expect our kids to compete with the rest of the world when they can't even connect with the rest of the world? That's a problem. Why should that be a Democratic or Republican problem? It's a problem for the folks that live in that in those communities that don't have Wi-Fi access. And I can go on and on and on on the various issues in South Carolina. So that's the frame by which we're having discussions. And as a result of having it in that discussion, instead of talking about some legislation or some bill, who sponsored it and all that other stuff, because people don't care about that. All they care about is how does it impact me and my family? Is it making my life easier or is it making it harder? And I think if you discuss things in that manner, you get so much more done and you can have much more productive discussions with the people that you're trying to represent.
I agree with you. And we're going to talk first about your story, but when we get to the issues of the day, I love the lens you're looking through, which is about helping people and not Democrat nor Republican. And it's about people. It's about helping people. Yeah. And that's what, I mean, in its essence, I have to hope if people go to public service, it's because it's not about their ego. It's not about getting their name on a poster. You want to do it because you want to help people.
You want to make a difference.
Right.
Yes.
So your story, I mean, it's remarkable, Jamie. You're the son of a teenage mom, a single parent, raised by your grandparents in South Carolina in poverty. You end up going to Yale undergrad and Georgetown Law School. But let's go back. I mean, what are the lessons of growing up impoverished with your grandparents raising you? What are the lessons of life? What values that give you today as a man?
Listen, Dean, it was hard. And I I don't exaggerate on this. It was hard growing up. I remember mornings getting up, getting the bowl of cereal, and you go to the fridge to get the milk, and there's no milk there. It wasn't because somebody forgot to go get the milk yesterday or the day before, right? It was because we couldn't afford a carton of milk. I remember days my grandfather would wake up in the morning, and it's time for him to go to work. I have to go to school, and so he says to my grandma, I don't have any gas in the truck, and I can't get to work. And so I'm digging through couch cushions to try to see if I can find a nickel or a quarter or a dime or something so that he can just get a little gallon of gas to go to work and back. It was just really, really difficult. But, those times are still difficult for people in South Carolina right now. But this is a difference between the times that I grew up and the difficulties and the time that people live right now. For me, I still had hope. There were opportunities that arise and presented themselves that allowed me to almost escape that poverty, we were steeped in poverty, escape that so that I could do better for myself and for my families. But the kids that are growing up right now in South Carolina, they don't have much hope. Those opportunities are few and far between. What makes me sad is they realize that there's very little hope. Wow. And it's I mean, it just like taking a dagger to the heart. And you see these kids who just feel like, well, this is just how it is in this neighborhood. And folks don't go on to do bigger and better things. And so that's what I want to change. But in order to change it, you got to change the leadership. Right? Because those opportunities come from the folks who are enacting the laws or are having the power to change the things in these communities.
When you talk about the kids saying, I'm not going to even dream, because on some level it's cruel to dream.
Yes.
Because you're dreaming of something you can't get.
You can't get.
It reminds me when I used to go to the Middle East a lot for comedy years ago. And there was this wealthy class and then the impoverished. And it was almost a caste system.
Yes.
Where they didn't even dream of a better life because you couldn't. It really, truly was cruel. And to hear this in America, that's going on in South Carolina, how does it affect their desire for like long-term planning? Like, okay, I'm going to work hard and go to high school and college or vocational school or whatever. There's nothing.
There is none. It's all short-term, right?
Right.
And that's what I see with many of these kids. And it's, as I said, it is absolutely heartbreaking. And we have to change it. We are facing the first generation of Americans in a long time where the parents don't believe that their kids will be better off than they are.
Yeah.
And that's sad. And that is so anti-America, right?
Absolutely.
I feel like my life is a testimony to the American dream. My philosophy in life, people tell you all the time, this is impossible, that is impossible. I heard it all while I was growing up. I hear it now running for the U.S. Senate. It's impossible to beat the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Blah, blah, blah. He's been there for however long. But one thing I've learned in my life is in this country, and throughout my life it's been the situation, that the impossible is always possible. Mm-hmm. And I feel that into the bottom of it. And what I want to make sure is that remains the case, that young folks can look at the impossible and say, you know what, I'm going to work hard and I'm going to do it.
So when you were a kid and you're living with your grandparents and you don't even have milk in the refrigerator some mornings for breakfast, how did you have dreams of Yale? How did this come up where you go like, you know what, I think I'm going to go to the best Ivy League school. Yale and Harvard are the two best.
Yeah.
The best. How could you let yourself dream, and what made you inspire you to actually pursue that dream?
Yeah. So, I did well in school, and my grandparents and my mom, even though they didn't have a whole lot of education, they always knew that the gateway was education. Right. And they always encouraged me, Jamie, you're going to go to school. What do you want to get involved in? And we're going to make sure you're there. We take you there. And they would sacrifice so much so that if I was interested in anything, they would make sure that I got the opportunity to see if I liked it, right? And for that, I'm so thankful for that. And so by doing that, it started to open my eyes to what was possible. And, I did well in school, and so I did well on test, and the College Board sent my scores to all of these colleges, and then I started getting all of this material in, right, from the colleges. And there was one day I got this material from Yale University, and I was like, whoa,
yes,
Yale. I didn't know what the Ivy League was, but I'd heard of Yale and heard of Harvard, right? Because you can't live in this country without hearing about it. And so I said, well, and the admissions counselor from Yale was coming to South Carolina, was coming to Columbia, and they invited me to go. And I told my grandfather, I said, Mr. Bookie, I want to go. I said, but it's in Columbia. I said, can I borrow your car? Now, my grandfather drove a 1978 Ford LTD, right? This is back in, and that was back in 94.
Okay.
Right? 1978 Ford LTD is big boat.
Sure, yeah.
And, but he said, boy, that car could barely go up and down that road, but if this is really, really important, I'll let you go. And I said, yeah, I really wanted to do it. So a few of my friends jumped in the car with me. We drove up to Columbia, and I sat there, and I heard the Yale Russian chorus sung, and I heard the counselor, and I turned to my friends and said, that's where I want to go. And so I applied, and when I applied, some of my counselors were like, well, Jamie, we don't think you probably won't get in. Kids from our school don't usually get into these that type of school. But I applied anyway because I always have believed, and my grandparents instilled in me, that no is not an answer, that you always try. And then if you try and you don't make it, then that's one thing, but you don't tell yourself no. That you let other people tell you that you can't do it. And so I applied, and lo and behold, I remember the date, April 2nd, 1994.
You remember it.
I go to the mailbox, And at that time, kids today, they get emails. So
I know.
There was no email.
And my
then.
nieces, early admission, they're like, the email's coming at 7:00. And I go, what?
Yeah.
That's what's going on. Said, yeah.
There was no email then. And so we got big envelopes or small envelopes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yep. So I went to the mailbox, pulled out a stack of envelopes, and I'm flipping through, and there's this big white envelope that says Yale in the corner. And Dean, I ripped that thing open, and I read, blah, 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 Jamie accepted Yale. And I started yelling. I was like, I got in. And my grandma came running to the door. She was like, boy, you going to wake up the dad. What are you screaming for? And I said, I got in. Now, my grandma had no clue what I got into, right? But she started jumping up, oh, Lord, oh, Jesus, oh, thank the Lord. He got in. But she had no clue. But she was just happy because she knew I was.
Right.
And the rest is history. Now, I almost did not go. We were $2,500 short. We got a scholarship and all, a need-based scholarship and all. We were $2,500 short. For us, $2,500 was like $250,000, right? And if it weren't for, and I believe he's my good Samaritan, my guardian angel, he's no longer with us. His name was Earl Middleton. This guy was a Tuskegee Airman. He was the first African-American to get a Coldwell Banker franchise in South Carolina. And I had met him 3 months earlier because I was elected mayor for a day in my high school, right? So I was shadowing the mayor. We went to a Kiwanis meeting, and there's this very distinguished African-American man in the back of the room at Kiwanis meeting with a cigar, just chewing in his mouth. It's not lit, it's just chewing on it. And then the mayor says, Jamie, I want you to meet Earl Middleton. And I met him, and he says, son, I'm proud. I hear you're doing well in school. I'm proud of you. If you ever need anything, you call me. So as I'm racking my brain about how to get this $2,500, nobody in my family's credit was good enough in order to get a loan. And I saw Mr. Earl's card sitting on my dresser. And I called him the next day, and he said, I want you to come to my office. And I stepped into his office, and he said, listen, I'm going to get you the $2,500. You're going to work for me this summer. You get the $2,500, and I'll buy you a laptop so you have for school. But if it had not been for him, I would not have gone because that was my last option. That was
just think how the trajectory of your life would be different.
Totally.
I mean, we may not have in this conversation right now. I don't know. You would have probably went to a college.
Oh, yeah, I would have.
You had great grades, and it could have ended up being the same. But Yale does open doors. We have to be blunt about it in the world we live in. So
it does. I'm
chatting with Jaime Harrison, a Democrat running for Senate against Lindsey Graham. JaimeHarrison.com, folks. I'm going to keep saying it because people. I read, was your grandparents, is it correct? One had like a 4th grade education, one had 8th grade education.
Yep.
But they understood how education opens doors in this country. And there's no doubt about that. I mean, you see it. My dad was an immigrant. He's Palestinian, came here from the Middle East. And he had not even high school. My mom born here in America, but had high school education and went to college, a little bit, community college. But they understood. And they're like, you got to go to college. I'm like, sure.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, I want to go to law school. They go, great, go to law school. Yeah. That's great. So they were happy. And for Palestinians, education is important because it's transportable. And you don't know whether it's Palestinian where you might live because it's not really a Palestine, as we all know. Yeah. So that's part of it. And so it's interesting to hear this story about they didn't have an education like my parents didn't, but they understood in America how important that would be and how life-changing it is and opens doors.
And it does.
So there's also a story, though, heartbreakingly about your grandfather was defrauded out of his house. How old were you when this happened?
So I was in middle school, and I remember this so clearly. So the house that I was born in, my grandparents decided to sell that house, and my grandma, for whatever reason, was infatuated with all these new mobile homes. Now, that leads to another residual story, which is about the need to do some financial literacy in many of our communities, right? Because we know that, mobile home depreciates and it doesn't appreciate like a house, right?
Interesting. I didn't even think that.
Yeah. So, but nonetheless, that they decided to go. And my grandma had her mind set on this one mobile home. So she and my grandfather went to the mobile home place. They bought it. They got a mortgage. They were happy. And the guy who was there, he said, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, what I need you to do is every month you come and you can make your mortgage payment here. Now, what my grandfather was very diligent about was paying his bills. He didn't have a whole lot, but he always wanted to make sure he paid his bills on time. And the mortgage / rent was he felt was his responsibility. So he'd get his paycheck, go to the post office, get a money order, and my grandma and I would go and drop the money off. And the guy said, well, don't worry about filling out the money order. I'll fill that out for you and I'll send it in. And they did that for a few months. And then finally they get a letter in the mail. And so they didn't read very well, but I was a good reader. And so I would read it to them. And my grandma said, well, that's strange because we've been paying the mortgage. And so she said, I'll take it down to the place. And she goes to the place. She talks to the man. Oh, that's an error. There's some computer mistake. I'll call them and get it straightened out. So they continue to do it. And then one day you get a knock on the door. And it's the sheriff that says, Mr. and Miss Harrison, really sorry to tell you, but the bank has foreclosed on your mobile home and you have this amount of time to move out. I mean, it was heartbreaking for us.
Oh my
and
gosh.
you know, I never really saw my grandfather cry very often, but that was one moment when he did. And so, you know, for months, we would sleep at aunts and uncles and the homes of cousins and all, and you know, it was really hard. And I made a promise that day, and I never said it to anybody, but I made a promise that I was going to really do well so one day I could buy my grandparents a house.
And you did.
And I did. In 2004, after this was the year I graduated from law school at Georgetown, I went back home to South Carolina to work on a Senate campaign for Inez Tenenbaum. And while I was home, it was so great because I got a chance to see my grandparents almost every other day. And my grandfather at that time had become disabled. He had diabetes, and he eventually had to get part of his leg amputated and toes. And so he would sit out on the porch of the house that they were renting every day. And, you know, crime in the neighborhood had started to get bad, you know, guys shooting up and all that stuff. And so he would complain about that. And I said to myself and my mom, I said, you know what? I think it's time for us to try to find him another house. And so I had saved up a little money because I was working on the Hill and going to law school at the same time. And so I was there. And I went and talked to a realtor and I found a house for them. I didn't tell them. So we bought the house August of 2004. And I go and I pick up my grandfather and my grandmother, and I told him, I said, hey, Mr. Bookie, I'm going to take you over someplace. And he said, okay. So we got him in the wheelchair and then got him in the car, and we drive over. We're over in the nice side of town, as my grandfather would say. And so we're driving around. He said, boy, whose house are you taking me to? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm just driving around. I want to show you something. So we drive up into the yard, and this is really pretty, nice little yellow house, 3 bedrooms, nice trees, a well-manicured yard. And he said, oh, this is a nice house. And I said, well, Mr. Bookie, this is yours. He said, boy, what are you talking about? Stop that crazy talk. I said, no, this is yours. And a smile on his face. And then, you know, he started tearing up, right. and he loved that house. He really did. Now, you know, the sad part of the story is my grandfather only got about 3 months to live in.
Oh, and
he passed away that November, but I can tell you,
the thrill you brought him, though,
he was so happy, man.
I can't even imagine the thrill of doing that for people who raised you to be able to do that. The thrill you must have had doing that as well, and the satisfaction after what they went through, first raising you, but secondly being defrauded out of their house. And I mean, this experience, like when you go around South Carolina and you're talking to people and they're different economic levels, on some level, I imagine it must make it, you can relate to them.
Yes.
And also, there's not even a hint that you feel like you're better or that you're elite. Because I have to be blunt, there are even some liberals who are my friends, there's an elitism that comes off them. And I'm like, there's something wrong with you. Like, I can feel your elitism and I don't like it. Yeah. And for you, you've lived the life of everyone from literally moving homeless just about to going to law school and being a lawyer.
Yeah. Well, and this is the magic for me is I don't have all the answers. And some of these people in these communities, even though they're having rough times, they know what will make their lives better, right? So sometimes it's just about having the conversations. You go to where people are and have the conversations, and they can take you They can give you the road and the map to how they need to what would change their lives to get them to another place. And so what my role is being able to leverage the resources and what we have in order to help them get to that point. It's not about me being smarter or knowing better than they about what is ailing their lives or holding them down. They know.
Right.
They have identified, I need to change this in my life. And if this happens, then X, Y, Z can happen. And so, I think that's the difference of growing up in that type of community and all. Because sometimes I find, on our side that folks think that they know better, right? It's a paternalistic approach. And that's not an approach that I subscribe to. And actually, I think it is much more harmful than helpful. And so it's about going to where people are and allowing them to lead you to where they want to be. And
I suppose you're saying, I know what is going to make your life better.
Yes.
I know what I can do. Have them tell you.
Yes, have them tell you.
Well, that's the way it should be, right? I mean, it's funny.
That's
it's common
exactly
sense,
right.
but I guess you're right. There are icy politicians who will tell you, we're going to do this for you or that for you. And I'm like, who's this resonating with? Because I have no idea why that person's saying that. And I always figured they must have thought this through somehow, but maybe they didn't.
Yes.
They just sat around, and it almost comes from a paternal place. It
That's
could come
right.
from a good place.
Yes.
Or in the case of Trump, it comes from a bad place.
Well, and I tell the story all the time about, this is an example I give of this situation and how I approach life and how I think about things. It's not about the positions. Sometimes politicians get caught up in positions and they don't take the time to understand the underlying interests behind the position, right? So I tell the story of a mom. You got two kids in the kitchen and they're fighting over an orange. Like they're fighting, I want the orange. No, I want the orange. And they're fighting. And suddenly mom comes in and says, I am tired and sick and tired of hearing this noise about y'all fighting over this orange. And she takes the orange and she cuts it in half and she gives it to the two kids. And the two kids, mom walks out, right? She thinks she has solved the problem, right? The two kids are there sad. And they're sad because the position was they wanted the orange, but the interests were different. One kid wanted the orange peel, right, to make an icing, and the other kid wanted the orange pulp to make orange juice, right? If the mom had just taken a little time to figure out the underlying interest, they could have both been very happy.
You're absolutely right. That's kind of a funny. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back more with Jaime Harrison. He's running against Lindsey Graham. He's one of the key battleground states. For us to take the Senate back, we got to win South Carolina. Come right back with more of Jaime Harrison.
The Dean Obeidallah Show.
Voting is the most important civil right of our era because the right to vote preserves all other rights. It's not the Second Amendment. It's not guns. It's voting.
SiriusXM Progress.
You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, Sirius XM's Progress.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live here Tuesday, January 28th, in studio, spending the hour with us, Jaime Harrison, Democrat running for the U.S. Senate. It's going to beat Lindsey Graham this November if we all help out, and that's part of it. So before we get to the campaign, you made history becoming the first African American state Democratic chair. Mm-hmm. And what was it like breaking that glass ceiling? How challenging? Because you hear about South Carolina, 60% Democratic electorate is African American. Why was there never an African American
not
Democratic
until
chair?
2013,
yeah,
right?
I mean, how did that happen?
I don't know. I mean, it was one of those things that you break the ceiling, you're like, well, why did it take so long?
I know. I'm like, what happened?
To this extent, I still don't really know, and it's one of those things that I hope that the next chair, the next time it doesn't take that long. And listen, there were a lot of concerns that I heard, not directly but indirectly, like, oh, we don't know if an African American could raise the money in order to.
Interesting.
I mean, even within the party, there are issues within the party, and still as it relates to race and those type of things. I mean, I heard even running for the United States Senate, it was like, well, can an African American win statewide in South Carolina? Well, there's an African American senator right now,
Tim Scott, right?
So yeah, probably so.
It's funny about glass ceilings. Like I'm not bragging. It just happened to be. I'm the first Muslim American hosting a national radio show. Why there was not one before, I have no idea. And there could have been one who wasn't outspoken about their faith, and no one knew it.
Yeah.
Especially because there are many Black Muslims. 1/3 of the Muslim community is African American.
Yeah.
So there could have been someone here who was Black and Muslim and just didn't talk about their faith. But because we don't know about it, I'm going to be the last. I'm not letting anyone else. I'm stopping. I took the ladder with me. I'm the first and last Muslim American hosting a national radio show. No, but it's always stunning when things happen. You're like, why was there, like my friend, like Mahershala Ali, who I'm friendly with, first Muslim to win an Oscar for acting. You're like, that's weird. There's been Muslims acting forever. And then it just happens. And you're like, okay, that's done. And then you go to the next thing in life, whatever it might be.
Well, I feel like my obligation is to make sure that I am not the last.
Right, exactly.
That the opportunity that we inspire a whole new generation of young folks to take it up and say, you know what, I want to be a party chair one day. Or you know what, I want to run for the United States Senate, so that they see that you can do it and you can achieve when you do it. And that's been our focus. Our focus is to give me a record, show me the goal line, and I'm going to get to it. Right. And that's how I've been my entire life. That, I as I said, that I believe that in this country, the impossible is always possible.
Sure.
And I'm going to do everything in my power to try to get there.
So, people we all see in a way almost like they're almost celebrities in the world we live in now, some of the political figures, members of Congress and senators and stuff. But since you worked in grassroots politics, you worked for Congressman Clyburn, then you were state Democratic chair. Could you just share with people how behind the scenes you could have a really big impact on who the candidates are and on policy discussions? And I'm saying that to try to encourage people who might be like, well, I don't really want to run for office. Well, that's not really the backbone of the Democratic Party. It's grassroots activists who want to change policy and help people.
It is. And I believe it's all about making a difference. It really is. And there are avenues that everybody can get into. You don't have to be the front person. You don't have to be the candidate.
Right.
But you can work on Capitol Hill. You can work in state legislatures. You can be an activist on campaigns. And all of the work that you do helps to put people in positions so that they can ultimately make a difference. And that's really, really important. I mean, when you think about it, sometimes it's the national politics that gets all of this,
Sure.
You think, oh, that's
all the headlines.
Yeah, all the headlines. But it's really the local politics that actually make a bigger difference on the everyday lives of people. And so, I'm always encouraging young people to get internships, get fellowships, and particularly there are fellowships out now. Congress, when I was young, a young person, internships were for the well-off and the wealthy,
Right? They didn't pay.
Because they didn't
I
pay.
remember.
But now Congress has enacted legislation that allows them to pay some of their internships. And then there are programs like the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation that has an internship, the Hispanic Caucus, and the Asian Pacific Caucus that gives opportunities for young people, particularly in communities that have fewer opportunities, to be able to experience that life, and that's the path that I went on.
Sure.
And
what do you say to, because the listenership, we have all ages, but a lot of people who are very active in politics and follow are older, and they want to get involved, and many of them know how to. But what do you say to someone like, it's not just for younger people getting an internship? If you're older, you could be retired. You want to make a difference.
That's
you still
exactly
can
right.
do it. And share a little bit about what they can do and how they actually will be so embraced. Because I worked on campaigns.
Yeah.
People were ecstatic.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter your age. They'd love to see you.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, and it's just, I can't, and I say this for both Democrats and Republicans. I want young people, I want people in general to get involved with their government, understand their government, understand how it works, understand the political process. One of the things that I'm seeing right on this campaign trail, and I've seen while I've been involved in politics, that we need to bring civics back. I mean, seriously. Many people don't understand how the government works and how it can work for them. Mm-hmm. And when you don't, the one thing I learned from seeing greats like Jim Clyburn and John Lewis and all is like, you need to understand the rules. Understand how all of this stuff works, because it's the people who understand the rules are the people who get these things to work in their favor. And many times the least of us, and I know it's so hard, it's like adding yet another burden to you.
Right.
But it's really, really important for us to see the value in doing that. And so I'm always encouraging young people to get involved, to find something, to find your passion. To find your passion and to follow it, and you can start. This is a great year to start for young and old. It's great.
This year is great. Yeah.
Let me tell you, in the Democratic Party, there's so many things that you can do that go somebody's not even doing it. Like from the precinct level, you can volunteer on campaigns, a local campaign. All of those things are really important. You can become a delegate to the convention, and all of those things are really, really important. But you got to do your homework to figure out how you can get involved.
So you did all your homework, you were state chair, and then you said, I'm going to go in front. I'm going to run for the U.S. Senate. So when you were thinking about this, you had to look at Lindsey Graham and go, this guy's going to be at least challenging to run against. So how much did it calculate in your head that, is it the right thing to do against Lindsey?
It was a big conversation, particularly with my wife, right? Because she's like, you can't be Don Quixote, right? You can't be chasing after windmills. We have a 5-year-old and a 9-month-old baby boy at home, right? So it's a huge, to run for office is a huge personal sacrifice and a huge burden also on your family. And so she wanted to make sure that we could do this and do it and have a pathway to win. And listen, if this was the old Lindsey Graham, I would have told you, it's hard. It's virtually impossible. But this is a very different Lindsey Graham. This Lindsey Graham epitomizes why people hate politics. Mm-hmm. This Lindsey Graham is focused on being important and relevant in Washington, D.C. instead of being focused and relevant in the minds of the folks in South Carolina. And so, we saw and made the assessment that there are a lot of people who are asking all across the state, what happened to Lindsey Graham? And we started hearing it from some of our Republican friends and independent friends and Democratic friends. When SNL and some of the other shows are starting to make fun of your senator every night for the constant flip-flops and not having a backbone or spine or no moral compass, it says that there's an opportunity there. And I knew, looking and talking to the people in South Carolina, particularly these young people, and they're constantly saying, you know what, I don't see a path. I don't see any hope. I don't have any hope. I just knew that we had to do something. But we needed somebody. I've seen enough races in South Carolina, enough campaigns to know that we needed someone who could galvanize the African American vote, someone who could appeal to our independent voters in the state, someone who could appeal to moderate Republicans as well. and then somebody who could get the support needed nationally and locally to put together a type of campaign to challenge someone who's been in Washington, D.C. for well over 20 years. And those folks were few and far between. And then, I thought about that quote from Dr. King, which is, he says, we will repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. Mm-hmm. And I said to myself, Jamie, if you sit on the sidelines when you can do more, you're being silent. And we, in this time of crisis, we couldn't afford, any of us, to be silent. And
from what I've seen, first of all, we'll give a top line here. There's a recent poll, you're within 2 points of Lindsey Graham.
Within the margin of error.
This is a guy who has been around forever, Lindsey Graham. First it was in the House, then in the Senate. You're within 2 points. Yes. And this is the first time you ran for office?
First time I've ever run for office. I've always been the guy behind, the person running. But
and so, I mean, when you're out there, let's talk about the real issues, because you're going on, Lindsey Graham's going on Fox News. You're
every
going
night.
On the street and knocking on doors
Yes.
and talking to people. So when you're going around the state of South Carolina, what's the top couple of issues that you hear from people? They say, I want you, Jamie, to go to Washington and fight for me on this.
Healthcare.
Healthcare,
number one issue. We have so many issues in healthcare. 200,000 plus people without healthcare insurance right now who should have Medicaid. So South Carolina is one of those states with no Medicaid expansion. And as a result of no Medicaid expansion, our rural hospitals have closed, and I've told you about this. We've had 4 rural hospitals that close, and there are probably about 2 or 3 ones that are sitting on a bubble right now. Right. We have so many issues, so many health disparities in South Carolina. Prescription drugs is a huge issue because we have so many seniors. And my grandma tells me all the time of friends of hers who, have to decide between their medicine or their light bill, right? We have to address these type of issues, and they should not be partisan, because we should all want to make sure that all our fellow citizens have the best as it relates to healthcare.
I couldn't agree with you more. And meanwhile, you have Trump. Look, he lies a lot, but the one place that he lies that I find, there's various places, but one that's very painful is he lies and tells his base, I'm going to fight for your coverage for pre-existing health conditions. And he's literally in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals arguing, and they actually won it. One got remanded down to district court to talk about how it's going to play out. But they're fighting and they're winning to get rid of all the benefits of the ACA, including coverage for pre-existing health conditions. And there's no backup plan. People will lose.
That's exactly
your insurance company can go, that's it. We're not next renewal. You're not getting covered for your heart pills or for your cancer or anything else you have. It's unreal. And that lie to me is so insidious and so horrible, because it's going to hurt people's lives.
That's exactly right. And it's not just old people. It's
right,
young people too.
Exactly.
It's everybody. I mean, a quarter of South Carolina has pre-existing conditions.
A quarter
of the state.
People.
It's a lot of people. And then we know, just being a woman, and if you give birth, that's considered a pre-existing condition.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is unbelievable. And for them, and Lindsey Graham's at the front of it. I mean, Lindsey came up with a healthcare bill because he wanted to appease the president and curry favor with the president, called the Graham-Cassidy healthcare bill. This is a bill that Lindsey Graham came up with, not because he went and talked to a bunch of doctors and to his citizens in the citizens of South Carolina about healthcare. He was in a barber shop with Rick Santorum, and they came up with this idea of, why don't we block grant healthcare and send less money for the healthcare plan and send it to the states and not cover pre-existing conditions. And then he'll go around the state and lie and say, well, I want to protect pre-existing conditions. That is a lie, sir.
Absolutely.
It is a bold-faced lie, and you don't want to do it. Actually, you want to make healthcare even more difficult for folks in your state to get and to utilize. And we got to call it for what it is.
I couldn't agree with you more. That issue affects everyone. It affects your children, your
That's
grandchildren.
Exactly right.
This is life and death. When they were going to repeal the ACA, I had people crying,
Yes.
literally crying on the show, calling me, going, my kids, we're not going to be able to afford coverage anymore because they're going to deem it a pre-existing condition. And then, as a lawyer who used to do healthcare law, your insurance carrier will either not cover you or preclude coverage for that, meaning it's all out of pocket, or jack up the rates to where you can't afford it anymore. What about the economy in your state in terms of middle class and lower class, because Trump's golf buddies are doing great. There's
Oh,
no
yeah.
doubt, top 10%. They own
the
84%
tax
of
cuts,
stocks.
yeah.
They're doing great. So the wealthy guys he plays golf with, he's like, the economy's great. To his world, it is. His millionaires in his cabinet, they're doing great. What are you seeing in the middle class and lower middle class in your state?
No, well, they're hurting. They are hurting. So just recently, and you hear it all the time, folks were like, well, the economy is doing so well. Unemployment's so low. Blah, 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 blah. Yep. But when you look underneath all of those statistics and you look at wage stagnation, just recently, New York Times had an article that talked about the eviction levels in South Carolina. North Charleston is the number one city in the country in terms of evictions, meaning that there are people in Charleston County.
Right.
It's probably one of the most vibrant economies in the state of South Carolina because it's just constantly growing. But the wages are not keeping up with the rent. And so the rent and the properties is increasing, and the folks, the everyday people who work in some of the restaurants and are part of the tourism industry, those folks are struggling. And what we're finding is they're pushing poor people out of the city. Like they're going further and further out of the city, and they have to live, an hour outside the city in order and they have to travel an hour to work. But if you have very little income, then the quality of the car you have probably is not the greatest, right? I know that from firsthand.
Sure.
And so driving, logging, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, it is extremely hard. And then you couple that with the difficulty of childcare. Right? We're a middle class family and we struggle with childcare.
Sure.
It's such a huge issue. And if you're in one of these rural communities where there are not very many daycares, you don't have the opportunity. If you're living in a community where you're not with your family, right? Because for so many of, I remember growing up, I always had an aunt or a grandma or somebody that you could stay with that, your parents aren't paying and you just hang around.
Sure.
And all. Well, that luxury, people aren't living in those type of families anymore, and they don't have that luxury. And childcare is so expensive. So there's so much that working people, the strain that is on working folks right now, and we got to figure out how we alleviate that.
And that's the big question. I've had economists on to talk about the idea. I wish there was a simple answer to raise wages. One is raising the national minimum wage, do overtime. That's an easy one. But the other one's, how do you lift wages which are really stuck? Because look, the average wage last year went up about 2.9%, and inflation was 1.9%, meaning the average American got a 1% raise.
Yeah.
The wealthy got much more than that. I'm not being hyperbolic. They did. The average American, 1%, and everything else keeps going up and going up. And I don't know how people survive.
Well, one of the things, we're looking at, and we have a policy committee that's kind of exploring a lot of things, the earned income tax credit. I know the value of the earned income tax credit, and you live in lower income communities. That's an invaluable thing. And ironically, that was like created during Ronald Reagan.
Right.
Right. But that credit has taken so many people out of poverty. Right?
How does it work on a practical level? I've had people talk about it.
Yeah, so it depends on the amount of the income, and they give you a refundable credit in your taxes. So you get a tax refund in the end, in the end of the year. And so many people use that refund to buy a car.
That's great.
All these things. And so you can adjust. And right now, I think the Congressional Black Caucus has some legislation and looking at making some adjustments to that, making some adjustments also to the child tax credit. We can also look at the burden of the student loans and making adjustment to that, maybe increasing the bar for, there are ways that we can tinker around with the tax system that helps working folks get more resources so that it takes them further out of poverty and allows them to be have much more vibrant lives.
No, that's a great thing. It's funny, I talked to many of the 2020 candidates. John Delaney's brought that up all the time, earned income tax credit. And any other, because we have to talk about 2020 because South Carolina is such a pivotal state. Yeah. And I just imagine, like, you walk out, there's a candidate, you make a left, there's a candidate.
I can throw a rock and hit one.
They're everywhere. They're everywhere. But what's going on with, so you've got healthcare, you've got the idea of housing costs.
The environment.
And is the environment another big issue in South Carolina?
The environment's a huge issue. Well, when you think about our number one industry in our state, tourism, right?
Yeah. Sure, I've been there.
Yes. Tourism is the number one industry in the state. So when you start to get huge hurricanes that are now category 4 and 5 all the time, 1,000-year floods are now every other year.
Yep.
You couple that with the environmental justice issues that we have as well. It's a huge problem in our state. And then you got Republicans like Lindsey Graham and President talking about drilling off of the coast of South Carolina, right? That is a recipe for disaster. And so the environment is a huge, huge issue. We want to see what we can do to make it greener, how we can create more jobs, and how we can get our farmers also involved in terms of protecting our environment, which helps to stabilize the agricultural community right now. Dealing with all of the tariffs, even though it seems like we've come to some impasse on tariffs, but the tariff war had a huge impact on South Carolina because we have so many soybean farmers. And so, you got all of these things going on, and we just got to figure out how we address that. And then the other thing is just education. Education is such a big issue. The student loan debt crisis is a real, real big issue that everybody, even if you don't have student loans, should be concerned about. Because of the residual impact on our economy. When you think about, we're about to get a generation of people, of renters, not of property owners, of renters. Why are they not property owners? It's because they are burdened with hundreds of thousands of student loan debt that they can't afford to get own property. And when they don't own property, they rent. And how are our schools funded? Schools are funded primarily through property taxes. Right?
We've got to take a quick break.
Yeah.
Chatting with Jaime Harrison. He's the Democratic candidate running for the U.S. Senate against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk for a few minutes about 2020 in South Carolina, what you can share about not the candidates, but the energy on the ground, and is it making you optimistic overall? So let's take a break and come right back with Jaime.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127. Didn't catch it all? Missed an interview? Have no fear. The Dean Obadala Show goes with you. On demand at SiriusXM.com/on-demand and on the SiriusXM app. Or you can reach Dean anytime on Twitter at Dean Obadala or at SXM Progress or live 6 p.m. East, 3 West on SiriusXM Progress 127.
This is the Dean Obeidallah Show, exclusively on SiriusXM's Progress.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live Tuesday, January 28th. And who stayed in studio for a whole hour? Jaime Harrison, who I'd like to call the next U.S. Senator from the great state of South Carolina, taking on Lindsey Graham. JaimeHarrison.com. I'm saving from having to say to go to JaimeHarrison.com. Make a donation. You raised over $3 million last quarter.
$3.5 million. The most that any. This is the number 2, I guess. Lindsey raised 3.9, and that's now the new record.
Right.
But it's the most that any Democrat has ever raised in the history of South Carolina.
And I can only imagine, talking about your roots, where you came from.
Yeah.
This much money in a quarter.
It's a lot of money.
It's got to be stunning.
Well, it is stunning, and it's sort of sinful in a way, too. And it's one of those things, once I'm in the Senate, one of the things I'm going to be working very hard on is we should not be wasting all of this money on elections. I mean, it's just too much. I've visited some of our historically black colleges in South Carolina, 4 out of the 8 so far, and they tell me that, one college I went to, and they have 1,000 kids, and their annual budget is $13 million, right? And I think about the impact that has on the community, on the town, on the lives of those kids. And I think, I've raised $7.5 million thus far, right? And yes, I'm proud because it's a lot of hard work.
You need the money. You can't beat an incumbent like Lindsey Graham without raising money. That's how it works.
We got to figure out how we do the system better, and instead of having all this money go to TV ads and all this other stuff, like figure out how we can have the honest policy discussion and debate without having to raise like these ungodly amounts of money.
And in polls, there are a few things we do agree on the left and the right, and that's one of them.
Yes,
because everyone knows. Look, if some politician said my vote is equal to someone who gave them $1 million for their super PAC, that politician is an idiot or a liar. You should care more about the guy that gave $1 million, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
They can legally give $1 million to your $5 million to your super PAC. I can give a vote. I mean, so changing that is so fundamental.
We have to change it. Now, I'm telling you, listen, that does not mean you don't need to go online and contribute. Because I do need the contributions, but we change it once I'm there.
So let's talk last couple minutes. 2020 South Carolina, the 4th contest.
First in the
Iowa,
South.
New Hampshire. Yep. Then you got Nevada, then South Carolina. We know the polls, Joe Biden leading. That's not the question. What's the energy like on the ground? What are you seeing?
There's great energy right now, though I think some of the folks they're ready for the election to happen.
They are.
Right? They really are, because the candidates have been there now for well over a year, and they're just ready to go ahead and go to the polls and make their decision. But it's very interesting. One of the things that I think for South Carolina that is unique is it's a first in the South, but it's also the first state with a significant African-American population.
Sure.
And so some of the issues that we see being discussed are issues that I think will be very relevant to the minds of voters going into some of the Super Tuesday states. And that's why I think South Carolina's significance in the first 4 is even heightened above just in Iowa and New Hampshire.
I agree.
It provides a springboard for somebody. And the one thing that we know is that if you are a candidate and you cannot get the African American population energized and excited, then you're probably not going to win.
Jaime, we got a minute left. This was a fast hour with you. So do you want to plug your website yourself, even though I plugged it 50 times?
Yes.
And why people should go there and make a donation and volunteer and help you?
This is about building a new movement. This seat that I am running for was occupied by somebody called Ben Pitchfork Tillman, who celebrated the lynchings of black people. This is a seat that Strom Thurmond sat in. This is a seat that Lindsey Graham is currently occupying. But guess what? Due to your help, we are going to send Lindsey Graham home. So thank you. Go to JaimeHarrison.com. That's spelled Jaime like Jaime. JaimeHarrison.com.
JaimeHarrison.com. Was great chatting with you.
Thank you.
Of course, folks, coming up next, John Fugelsang with Tell Me Everything with John Fugelsang. Don't go anywhere. I'm on Twitter all day, all night, at Dean Obeidallah. Jamie's on Twitter, too.
Yes, Harrison Jaime.
Harrison Jaime. And drop me an email, dean@deanofradio.com. Love to hear your suggestions. Jaime, it was great chatting with you and meeting you in person.
So great to see you.
I wish you the best.
Thank you,
I know
friend.
I feel great. I feel like I'm meeting with a future president right here.
I don't know about that.
Jaime, we'll see. God willing. Inshallah, as Muslims say. God willing.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.